Everyone, and thank you for joining us for another wonderful presentation. Today, from the Student Accessibility Support Center at Stony Brook University, our distinguished presenters will be Cindy Grimley, testing coordinator, who has a degree in psychology and special education from Malloy College. Wendi Mathews, who is the director of the SASC Center, who is also a licensed clinical social worker and holds her master's in social work from Adelphi University. And Abigail Maher, who is also the graduate student coordinator, who is working towards an MAT in TESOL and French. A couple of reminders. If you have any questions, we would like you to acknowledge by putting the big letter Q in the chat room, and we will try to address it as soon as we're able to. Without further ado, we'd like to introduce to you the SASC team from Stony Brook, Cynthia, Wendi, and Abigail.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My team here, we're so excited to be here today and be able to talk to you a little bit about accessibility and testing and kind of how that all came to be for us at Stony Brook. Just so that you all know, I am Wendi Mathews, as I was introduced so much by Howard. Thank you. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and hers, just so that you are aware. So before we start talking about testing accommodations and kind of how that all came to be, just a little bit about SASC. We love to say that we're the sassy in Stony Brook, so we give a little hand with it. But what we do is basically we provide accommodations for our students here. That sometimes can be housing accommodations, testing accommodations, or classroom accommodations. That's all done through an interactive process. So basically, students will come in, they provide us documentation, we meet with them, we go over what type of accommodations they might be needing, and then we go forward. So one of the things that we commonly have done before in the past is testing accommodation. That is our largest accommodation that we do here at Stony Brook. If you can go to the next slide. So just to know,
Sorry.
That's okay. So as far as, you know, the testing accommodations, 1.5 was always our largest accommodation. Double time is something that's more, you know, infrequent. When we would decide to do our accommodations in the past, they would actually be done in-house before COVID, everything before COVID. So we would provide accommodations for our students. They would come in, they would meet with, you know, a proctor, you know, they'd be able to have their exams in person. Sometimes we did have online exams, but those online exams would actually be done at our testing facility. So once, you know, COVID kind of hit, you know, we had to figure out very quickly, you know, how we were going to make these kind of changes. So I like to show, I'm sure many of us can laugh at this one, a meteor hitting Earth. This is COVID. And for accessibility offices, this is us. So, you know, when we all kind of had to go online in the spring, we were like, oh my goodness, what do we do? Because in our offices, it doesn't stop. So just because classes went, you know, virtual or online, we still needed to figure out very quickly how we were going to be able to provide our accommodations for students. And I remember sitting back thinking, I can't believe it's now over a year ago, but I remember going, how are we going to do our testing? And I was like, we are not getting in the business of doing virtual Zoom testing. Okay, well, I lied because we needed to figure out very quickly how we were going to be able to do it. So if you can go on to the next slide, Cynthia. So I don't know if anybody had seen the AHEAD research that had come out a couple months ago, but one of the common barriers that people have identified is receiving their testing accommodations. So 61% in this, you know, in this specific research had indicated that there was difficulty getting those testing accommodations. And that kind of went along with what we were identifying here at Stony Brook when we were speaking with our students, because the conversation would come up is, how do I provide the accommodations, you know, to our students? How are we going to be able to deliver their exams? And there are a lot of barriers that Cynthia will talk about as to, you know, why we needed to do these remote type of exams. But there are so many that were identified that made it very difficult to provide, you know, the exam accommodations. So you can go to the next slide, Cynthia. So just to get an idea of how we would do our accommodations last time. If you can look at the slides here, you can see that right before COVID, we were doing close to 5,000 exams a year. And that's actually out of our really small office, which Cynthia Grimley, she's our testing coordinator, that she really manages along with, Abigail. So you can see that we were about 5,000. And then in the fall, we had 2,274, and then COVID hit and we were at 1,156. And I think the drop in number is that, we were trying to figure out how are we going to provide, testing, and some faculty have done maybe alternative types of assessments at that end of the semester. Then we had the summer at the university to kind of think about what the fall of 2020 was going to look like. And then we decided, that we were going to be using some programming types where they would do testing accommodations, whether it was Honor Lock and Blackboard and all of these things. So we started, piloting some stuff that Cynthia will talk about over the summer regarding doing online accommodations for testing. And you can see that although the number for the fall was 366, which is definitely different, for our testing, that's still a large number when you don't have your same proctors that you have on staff. You don't have, the availability like you did to do everybody in one room. So you're doing it all through Zoom. So it might not seem like a lot, but there's probably, I would say, if Cynthia agrees with me on this, there's probably more that goes into doing online proctoring than as opposed to somebody just coming in and arranging the exams. And you can see at this point, we're at 279 and the semester hasn't even closed. And I think part of that reason is faculty are now aware that we're doing this type of Zoom proctoring. I think in the beginning, people are skeptical about how are we going to implement this. And I think that we've done a really good job here at being able to do that. And that's really, credit to Cynthia and Abby. And I think more faculty are now using this. And I think that we're probably going to get to, at least 500 to 600, somewhere in that range by the end of the semester, especially, as we approach finals.
Okay, so hi, my name is Cynthia Grimley. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the testing coordinator at SASC. I began in actually November of 2019. So I saw part of a semester with regular testing accommodations, and then we were starting to get, have exams in the spring, and then COVID hit. So as Wendi said, we didn't do any testing over Zoom in the spring of 2020. Everybody the instructors were just reminded to make sure the students had extended time, and we gave students some resources about using a reader online, but we didn't do any testing. But we noticed that there were students that were coming across barriers with the online exams. So students that used any type of assistive technology with their exams, if they had a visual impairment and they were using a screen reader, a lot of times, so our university was using Respondus Lockdown Browser last spring and in the summer, and Respondus Lockdown Browser wouldn't work well with assistive technology, such as NVDA, which is a reading program, or JAWS, which is a screen reading program. We also had students that needed scribes, and we had to provide scribes for these students. We have students that have visual impairments that need exams read to them by a live reader, or they need charts or graphs or pictures explained also. And another issue that we had with Respondus Lockdown Browser was students that have breaks during exams. If they would get up out of their seat, Respondus would lock them out of the exam. So that became an issue. So all of these would get flagged on Respondus Lockdown Browser. In the fall, Stony Brook University began using, in addition to Respondus, we also are using Honor Lock, which is a program that uses artificial intelligence to proctor the exams. So if a student moves too much in the screen, or it looks like they have a cell phone or any other if looks like they're trying to cheat, a proctor will actually pop into their room, which can be a distracting situation. So over the summer, we decided that we would need some sort of alternative solution for our students that had accommodations. So I met with some staff from local colleges and universities to see what they were doing. And some of the places that I met with testing staff, and they were using Zoom proctoring in a very small amounts. And they shared, one of the places that I spoke with shared information from College Board, and College Board had created a best practices for Zoom proctoring for their AccuPlacer exams. So Abby and I work very closely together, and we really dove into that. One thing that we didn't like that was a practice that was being used at other places is they were putting proctors and students into breakout rooms, and proctors would cycle through the breakout rooms to see how the students were doing. And we just felt that more eyes on the student would be better than the students knowing that we would pop in and out. And we also thought popping in and out of these Zoom rooms would be distracting to some of our students that have reduced distraction testing environments. So over the summer of 2020, with a very limited number of students that had very specific accommodations, we started piloting Zoom proctoring to see what we felt that we could improve on and what we felt the needs were for this type of proctoring. So it actually started with a student that had breaks during exams, and I would proctor just one-on-one. And when he got up to have a break, that was fine. And then he would come back and finish the exam. And it seemed to work well. And we seemed to think that it was a viable option after we practiced a little bit. And we decided that we had to create some guidelines for how we were going to implement Zoom proctoring at Stony Brook. So one of the biggest things that we have to do, and this is why, so as a testing coordinator and somebody that's worked with testing accommodations for years, the biggest thing that we concentrate on, obviously working on this with the students, but we also really partner with faculty, making sure that we have the exams on time. But Zoom proctoring has changed things a little bit because there's a lot more communication that goes into Zoom proctoring for faculty. They had a lot of questions for us, rightfully so. And we do ask that they provide us with a cell phone number or a phone number that they will be able to be reached at during the exam in case our proctors have any issues at all. Sometimes it's simple as a student is having a technology issue and we just reach out to the instructor about that. Sometimes obviously the issues are bigger, but we do need a phone number so our proctors can quickly get in touch with the faculty member to try to troubleshoot anything that's going on. We created a frequently asked questions for faculty, thinking ahead to see what we thought faculty would question, things like the integrity of the exam, how we were going to proctor, what we were asking our proctors to do. So we also have asked, when students register for the exams, we have the date and the time. We need to know how long the exams are being given for in the classroom. So if it's an hour class, we know how to figure out extended time for the students. So here are I'll show you these forms just quickly. These are some forms that the Student Accessibility Support Center has created that are helpful for our Zoom proctoring. This first form is our request form, our online accommodations request form. This is a form that the students will complete and it goes to their counselor. And this just says, it lists their ID number, what semester, and then it goes through, this is the important stuff here, is the class that they're taking, how the class is being, what the format of the class is it in person? We have online synchronous classes that are live, on online asynchronous classes. And then we ask for instructor's name and what the students are requesting. And through the interactive process, the counselors will create accommodation letters that get sent to the instructors. So when a student, after they have registered for accommodations with our office and counselors have sent out these letters, they schedule exams through this online request form. So this is what students will see. So they put in their name, their ID, their email address. Sometimes there are comments that they need something specific, and then they will put their course. And then we need the class start time and class end time. So we'll only administer exams while the class is in session for the synchronous or live exams. And then if they need to request an alternative time, that's another interactive process we go through with the faculty. We talk to the faculty to see if that's approved, and we get approval for an alternate time. And then we need to know if the student, how the class is taking the exam, if they're taking it on paper in person, or the class is taking the exam online in person, or if the class is taking the exam online at home. So this is the information that the students submit to us. We do ask that the students request this exam 7 days in advance, so we're able to work with the instructors to get any information that we need, and also to work with our proctors and schedule our proctors for the exams.
And Cynthia, I know one of the questions that came up is, are these Google Forms? And yes, these are Google Forms that we are using.
Yes, so we create, yeah, they're Google Forms that we created, and then we have, you know, the spreadsheets that Google sort of creates for us. And then this was an additional form that we created for the Zoom proctoring. So this goes to the instructors. Once we have planned to proctor an exam over Zoom for our students, this goes to the instructor. So the instructor is told that there's a student that's requesting an exam. And then this is where we get the information from the instructor. So they have to give their name, email address, they'll list the students taking the exam. And then this is the most important piece that we ask for these exams, is a cell phone where the instructor can be reached or a teaching assistant can be reached. And then we need, you know, obviously the course, it's like Math 102, the date of the exam, the time, and then we also ask the instructor how long the class is given, and then how it will be administered. Sometimes they're administered through, so if an exam is administered through something like Respondus or HonorLock, the instructors turn that off for our students. So they create like a separate exam for our students to take it, because we're proctoring the student, they don't need HonorLock or Respondus at that point. And then we also need to know if there's anything allowed during the exam. Are the instructors allowing scrap paper or notes or a textbook? So we like to have that information ahead of time also. And then if there's any other specific details for the exam. So those are the forms that we've created for proctoring. And then Abby is going to go through a little bit more about how we train our proctors and what happens next.
So once all of these forms, so I'm Abby, by the way, I am the graduate student coordinator here at the Student Accessibility Support Center at Stony Brook University. My job, I really work closely with the proctors. So, you know, I interview them, train them, schedule them, coordinate them with students. I'm very much in contact with the proctors constantly. I saw in the chat that there was a question about who our proctors are. So just quickly to address that, we hire graduate students as our proctors. Our professional staff can proctor an exam if need be. So during finals week, we usually need a little extra proctors because there's of the high quantity of exams. But in general, we hire graduate students. We do this because there's usually not as much of a conflict of interest. So if we were to hire an undergraduate student, they might be in the class that they are administering the exam for. With graduate students, we don't run into this problem, so the integrity of the exam isn't in jeopardy. And we also tend to find that graduate students, if you made it into a master's or a PhD program, you're very dedicated, you're hardworking, you're organized, and so you make for a great worker. And so we really, really love all of our proctors. They're amazing. They respond to all of our emails, and let me tell you, I send a lot of emails. To schedule just one test, there's probably about 10 emails that goes into just one exam for one student. And we have to do this for hundreds of students basically on a weekly basis. So there's a lot of correspondence. So thank goodness that our proctors are punctual and reply quickly. So that's who our proctors are. And what we do now, after the students and the professors have completed those forms that Cynthia was just telling us about, we enter the exam into our computer system. We use a system called Clockwork. This automatically generates the extended time, so we don't have to do the math in our head. The students don't have to figure out, okay, if I have time and a half, how many minutes is that? The computer system does this for them. And it also sends out an auto-generated email to confirm their test booking. We have it set so that students, receive this confirmation, but they will only receive this confirmation if they submitted the test request at least 7 days in advance. We need that much time so that we can do all of this correspondence to find a proctor for the appropriate amount of time. We limit the number of students in a proctoring session. So there's 15 students max at any time. So if we have more than that, then we need to have more proctors. And so this time, the time it takes to schedule an exam is really important. And so we request at least 7 days in advance. Usually students don't always meet this deadline. If they come in with short notice, we do our best to find a proctor, but we can't guarantee it. And students are aware of this policy. They are told of this policy when they first register for accommodations with us, and they are reminded every step of the way when they go through completing those forms. And every time we send an email to them, we add a reminder in there about the 7 days notice. So once they have received their confirmation, and like I said, they only received the confirmation if they submitted it within 7 days, or if we were able to find coverage. Students can, like I just said, they can request a test late, but they don't get that confirmation until we know that we have coverage. All of our correspondence with proctors is done via email. And so I send out a weekly schedule. I start working on it the weekend before and start to fill up the time slots. So they can either sign up for a weekly time slot. And so say, somebody's available every Monday from 8 in the morning until 12 in the afternoon. They're going to be the first person offered the shift if a exam comes up during that time period. Everything else, if we don't have somebody already signed up for that time slot, then we send out an email and we call it flex scheduling, where they can sign up on the fly if they just happen to have time that week during that slot. And so that's how we schedule. Like I said before, it's a lot of back and forth, but it seemed to work for us. Cynthia, you can go to the next slide. So now I'm going to kind of get into the training that we give our proctors. So by the end of this, you guys will all be certified SASC proctors. So the first thing that you have to do, I see a question just popped up. Our proctors, it depends on the exam. If a student requires a live reader or a scribe, they'll be one-on-one in the session. If it's an exam where there's a lot of students, for example, we have these chemistry exams that happen every 2 weeks and there's about 20 students that sign up. We'll split the group into two so that it's like 10 and 10, and there'll be 2 proctors per session, just in case there's ever a technological issue, say somebody's laptop dies. We don't want the session to end just because of that. So we always have 2 proctors on a session just to remedy any technical issues that could come up. So the students, they can see each other. We have to have everybody's cameras on so that we can make sure that there are no phones, it's one of the ways that we make sure that students are not cheating. But we do have students leave their microphones off so that the sound is not distracting. We also, I'll get into more of this as we go through the training, but we change some of the settings so that students can't talk to each other. But the first thing that you have to do, if you guys, schools are using Google, so at Stony Brook, our email addresses are set up through Gmail. And so we use Google Suite for a lot of different things. As Cynthia said, we use Google Forms and they attach to Google Sheets. And we use Google Calendar, and Google Calendar is how we connect to our Zoom. In order to schedule an appointment for a proctor, since they are not necessarily part of our professional staff and here at the same time as professional staff, we need permission from them in their Google accounts to be able to schedule appointments from them. So they will need to have, they'll have to give you permission in their Google Calendar and in their Zoom account for you to be able to schedule for them. We learned this through trial and error, but we figured out how to set it up. You need to have both of these permissions. It's really important. Otherwise, they won't be able to access the session. So I'm going to go, so you guys are going to need to do that. And then we're going to go through the expectations of students during proctoring and what the proctors are expected to do. So for Zoom proctoring, we will send out a Zoom invitation and a list of students that you will be proctoring the day before the exam is scheduled. So if you're proctoring a chemistry exam on Tuesday, we're going to email you on Monday with the list of the students, the Zoom link, and any instructions. So like we had that form where the professor was supposed to tell us if they're allowed a calculator or scrap paper, we're going to include that in this email to our proctors. Then our second request for the proctors is that they enter the Zoom meeting 15 minutes before the scheduled exam. They will then use a SASC proctor background. I'm going to put mine on right now. We do this so that when students, if they do have a question, they know exactly who the proctor is. So they can say, oh, excuse me, Abby, or they can send a message directly to the proctor without it distracting other students. We also asked them to come in 15 minutes before the exam just to make sure that they were able to log on, that the link worked. It's basically to troubleshoot any technological issues that come up before the exam starts, because we don't want to take away from the time that the students have. So this is what I was saying about the settings that we change. We make sure that our proctors change the chat function to chat with host only. So when we schedule these appointments, like I said, with those permissions, you can schedule for somebody else to be the host of the Zoom meeting. We make the proctors the host, and then, like I said, we usually have two. So one will be assigned as the host, and then the other will be assigned as alternate host. Basically, whoever logged into the meeting first ends up being the host of the session, but if anything was to happen, the other proctor would automatically be turned into the host. And we set it to chat with host only, so students can't be messaging each other during the exam saying, hey, what'd you get for question 3? So that's why we have them do that. And also it's a way for them to, if anything comes up, for them to discreetly talk to the proctors instead of having to turn their microphone on and be like, I have to go to the bathroom. It's okay, they can just like say, I need a break in the chat quietly. And then the Zoom meeting will be set up with a waiting room. So when the meeting starts, there's going to be the waiting room, and you'll start to see as students log in, it'll say who's in the waiting room. You'll allow students in based on the attendance list that we had sent you. And also, we only let students in the first 10 minutes. If you are more than 10 minutes late for the exam, it's going to be distracting to have people keep popping in. So like Cynthia had said, a lot of our students have distraction reduced testing environment as part of their accommodation. So if we were going to have that doorbell sound go off constantly during an exam, that's not meeting their accommodations. And so after 10 minutes is the cutoff. You'll just get stuck in the waiting room. And then afterwards, you'll have to reschedule with your professor. Okay, so as students enter the meeting, you will need to check their surroundings. Ask the student to show you their desk and to ensure that it's clear of any unauthorized materials. So you'll just have them use their webcam to just do a sweep of the area, whether it's their desk, a dining room table, wherever they're taking the test. We want to make sure that their phone is not right next to them. We want to make sure that they don't have notes, just like as if they were taking tests in person. We don't want them to be able to have these extra things unless explicitly stated by the professor that it is open notes or that they're allowed to have these things. These are the instructions that the proctors recite to these students. So this is the code of conduct that students are expected to follow during these sessions. They need to keep their video on at all times during the exam, and they need to stay in sight. So their video needs to be on, but they also need to be in the frame of the camera. If I was like this through a whole exam, you wouldn't really know what I was doing. And so it's important for them to stay within frame. They cannot have any virtual background or videos. The proctors are the only ones who can have this virtual background, and it's just so that the students know who they are. We don't want virtual backgrounds or videos because we don't know what's going on behind you. Maybe you have somebody in the room talking to you. So we don't allow that. You're not allowed to chat with any other students during the Zoom meeting. We set the settings so that they can't do this, but if they figure out another way, we just want to make it clear that that is not acceptable and we don't allow that. They keep their microphone on mute. Like I said, this is to reduce distractions. And your Zoom name should appear as your preferred name on file with SBU. So we have an option in our student accounts to change our names. So my account actually says Abby instead of Abigail. So on class rosters, my name shows up as Abby Maher, not Abigail Maher. And so in the Zoom meeting, if I had an exam, I would sign in as Abby Maher. Other students have changed their names. And so it's whatever name is on file with the university as their preferred name. We don't want Mickey Mouse or Spider-Man in our testing sessions. We need to know who you are so that we can A, let you in, and B, check you with our attendance, because sometimes the professor asks, did so-and-so show up? And we need to know your name to be able to answer that question. If a student has a question during the exam, we will call the professor with the cell phone that they provided. So on that form, we ask for their phone numbers. Sometimes the question comes up and it's a technical thing, but sometimes it is a question about the exam. Like, I'm not really sure the phrasing of number 3. Can you ask the professor what he meant by XYZ? And so we'll have our proctors call and ask these questions. When students take tests with us, they kind of forfeit the ability to ask a question during an exam. And so this is a good way for them to still have the same accessibility to their professor. If a student takes any breaks or has an issue during the exam, we write down the time and how long that it took. If a student is gone for 20 minutes, that's something that we'll flag and we'll review. If a student just goes to the bathroom and is gone for like 3 minutes, it's not something that we really look into. If anything does happen, we have a testing incident form that we give to our proctors, and they will report any issues using this form to Cynthia, the testing coordinator. So then we will relay the message to the professors and, if needed, academic integrity. So if there's ever suspicion of cheating, we'll fill out one of these forms and review it and then pass it along to the proper avenues.
Abigail, I see someone keeps asking the same question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
I know, I think maybe you might have, but just in case, primary concerns about students concerned about seeing each other, and if students really share the same screen. I guess that keeps coming up about the confidentiality, and do you have issues like that from the students?
So we don't have students share their screens, because oftentimes we'll have students that are taking different exams. There might be, in the same session, we could have a math test, a Spanish test, and a chemistry test. So we don't have them share their screens because they're not necessarily related. Also, it would be hard to manage everybody trying to share their screen at once, since we have multiple students in a session.
Does it come up often that students are concerned about seeing other students or other students seeing them?
No, it hasn't really come up, because if they were in person, they would still be in the same room with these students. So it's not much different than we had it in the past, because in the past we would have these proctoring sessions, and it would be the same thing. It would be a Spanish test, a math test, and a chemistry test happening in the same room, in the same building. So they would see each other then and sign in at the same time.
How do you know if they're Googling each other or not?
That I'm not sure, but
It's okay.
And I think it's hard, right? Because there's obviously no perfect system out there. And this is not something that we're doing for all of our SASC students. This is something that if for some reason, how they would traditionally take the test does not work, this is one of the ways that we now offer, to be able to substitute that to make sure that they're still receiving their accommodation.
Thank you for the clarification.
So when students are finished with their exams, they send the proctor a message through the chat. Once the proctor has acknowledged this message, the student may exit. We do this just because a lot of professors ask for students to upload or scan something into the computer. And we want to make sure that that process is done before they log out, because we have the professor's phone number. So if there was an issue with this last part, this uploading section, then we could help them. But if they leave the meeting, they can't rejoin, and so we can't help them. And that's why we make them wait until we acknowledge, like, okay, you're done. Did everything go through? Okay, you can log out now. So they have to wait for permission from us to be able to exit the meeting.
Someone was asking for clarification. Did you say that the students are taking the exam at the same time? I don't see the rest of the question. It came from Merrill,
Let me look.
the last one.
No, students do take exams at the same time as those in class. It's just with their extended time, sometimes the professor can't stay on that long. And we don't want students jumping between Zoom meetings in the middle of a test. So we just take on those students. But the professor is readily available because they are proctoring the exam for the rest of the students at the same time. If a student has some sort of conflict, say they have another class directly after and their extended time runs into their next period, we will work with the student and the professors to come to an agreement on a new time. Maybe they start the exam early, or maybe they take it after class, but only if they need to change the time from the time of the rest of the class, we need written proof of permission from the professor. We will not just say, okay, you can take it whenever. We need to make sure that it has been approved, because some professors are concerned about about the integrity of their exam. So if they give the test in the morning, but the test is supposed to be in the afternoon, is that one student going to go and tell the other students what was on the test before they take it? So this is something that has come up, and that's why we require the permission.
And also just to add, Abby, we've been finding that a lot of students within their courses, the faculty are requiring them to take their exams on camera using whatever software that they've identified. So this way, like, as we were discussing, if a student needs a break, they're able to do it with us instead. So obviously, if they needed more time or extra time, that we're able to provide that instead of the faculty.
And how are tests submitted when they're completed?
So that depends on the course. Cynthia, answer that one, sorry.
Yeah, so it depends. This is why part of the reason that there's so much back and forth between our office and the instructors. So each of these exams are administered a little bit differently. So sometimes the students are just taking the exam on Blackboard and it's still online, just without Respondus or Honor Lock. And then they are just able to submit it through Blackboard that way. We have some instructors, there was a program that some math instructors were using last semester, Gradescope, and for whatever reason, they weren't able to extend the time in that program. So the instructors would email the students the exam, say the exam started at 1:30, the instructors would email the students the exam at 1:30, they would take it on Zoom with our proctors on paper and pencil. And then the students had to scan the exam and upload it either to Blackboard or to whatever program the instructors were asking for. So there is a little bit of back and forth and planning with the instructors. And I think Wendi brought up a good point. We're not proctoring, we're not offering Zoom proctoring for all of our students. So a student that has extended time on the exam most likely will not have Zoom proctoring. Or a student that has double time and that's their only accommodation, most of the time we don't proctor those unless it's something that we've worked out with the instructor. So a lot of times we're proctoring students that need a scribe. So if a student needs a scribe, it's a one-on-one proctoring, one proctor and one student. Sometimes if a student needs, again, like a live reader, it would be one-on-one because there's talking back and forth through the exam. Sometimes the students, if they're using a reader or some other sort of assistive technology that isn't working well with Respondus or Honor Lock, that can be, the students can listen to that because we keep the student is on mute. So they would just hear the screen reading program. But as instructors have realized that we're doing this, like, for example, we have chemistry that we give a relatively large group of students. Look, relatively large is all relative after COVID, because we used to give many, many exams, but now a relatively large group might be 30 students at one time taking a chemistry exam. So I'll just use this example. The instructor has their TAs, their teaching assistants, proctoring this chemistry exam at the exact same time we proctor it, but the TAs don't stay past the time. So let's just, I'm just going to use an hour because it's always the easiest. So after an hour, the TAs in the chemistry department with this exam will end their Zoom sessions. Our proctors we'll have students either for an hour and a half or for 2 hours, depending on if they get time and a half or double time for the exam. So that's one of our larger exams that we administer. So it happens to be every other Friday, and we have about 30 students. We do split them up. So as Abby said, we put 2 proctors in every session. Even if we have only maybe 2 or 3 students in the session, we put 2 proctors on. And how this started, really like a little TMI story. I was proctoring somebody in the summer with a math exam, and it kept going. Like after they finished one section, it was like, oh, here's the next section. Oh, here's the next session. And I had drank my coffee and I was like, and when the next session popped up, I was like, oh boy, I need a break for a minute. So in case a proctor needs a break for a minute or has an emergency or something happens at, where they are, or if there's any tech issues with a proctor, we'd like to have 2 proctors on at all times.
Do you all have an educational Google account? Yes, someone was asking.
Yes, sorry. Yes, we do.
So, and then we'll answer any questions you have. Absolutely. We're almost finished with our presentation. So this was part of Abby's also, that we just split it up. This is the information that students get. Again, they keep their videos on, they should not use any virtual background pictures or videos. We had found in our research somebody that put a video of themselves on Zoom. I didn't know you could even do a video as your background, and the person was in like a hoodie and they got up and walked away and there was still a person in like a hoodie. So no videos or virtual pictures, not to chat with anybody else. We ask them to keep their microphone on mute only because we don't want to distract other students. The Zoom name should appear as the name that we have on file as their preferred name. And they know that they should not be more than 10 minutes late to an exam. And look, I feel like none of these situations are perfect, right? I think we're all just doing the best we can in a virtual world that none of us were really prepared for, but we've tried to make it so the instructors are happy because they feel like we have eyes on the students. Can we, if they have their cell phone under the desk or whatever, can we control that? No, but we really are doing the best that we can with the constraints and doing this in an online testing environment.
So 5 takeaways, that we have is adapting to new technologies and new situations. I mean, I think Cynthia, said it perfectly, is that there's no perfect solution. We're trying to find something that, can work, and, where everything's changing day by day. So, because we use something one day, it doesn't mean it, would work the next. So we're just constantly making sure that when we're speaking with students, that whatever accommodations they need, I mean, we're learning something new every day. So, we'll get some student that, will say, well, I can't be on camera at all because of a disability related reasons. And, we're trying to find whatever, as we do in all of our disability offices, we're the creative people. Every day we're finding a new creative solution, to make sure that we're providing the accommodations as needed. Communication with students to understand their needs. I mean, that starts from the time that they enter, into our SASC services, when we get to partner with them, and it's, them communicating not only with their counselor, but, us, them communicating with, Cynthia and Abby. We like to make sure we have clear-cut communication here so that there are no questions that will really follow up. And I feel like we've done a really good job, but our students have done a remarkable job given this situation with adapting and doing everything they need to do. They amaze me every day with, with how this has been going. Collaboration with faculty. I always say, and I'm sure we all can agree with this, that we try our best to collaborate with faculty. And then, sometimes we have faculty that get back to us, sometimes we don't. I know there was a question in there at some point, if you have somebody that doesn't get back to us. We've been so far very lucky to be, having the relationships we do with our faculty. And if we do have a faculty member that doesn't, report back to us regarding testing, I'm usually the kind of the end all be all, and I then work with the departments and the chairs to really get that communication done. But we've been very successful with getting all the exams done within the time we needed to. Alternative assessments should be an option. So that might be, using another form, of exam, proctoring software if it doesn't work. And again, Cynthia had highlighted that, we had, I think it was like the chemistry department at one point, they were using a software, or the math department that might be using the software that sometimes might not be accessible, and we really have to work with them on creating that, and then, putting that into an online version. And then making sure that, there's preparation. We can't go into anything without, some preparation. So, that's why we have the forms that we do, the communication. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're not prepared, in the best way we can be, right? We can't prepare for everything, but to make sure we are, prepared somewhat, then at least we can provide what we need to for our students to make sure that their experience here is as seamless as possible. And I think that's about it. So we'd like to take any questions. I know that the chat's been kind of going off. So any questions you have? We'd be happy.
Well, actually, the chat is full of compliments. I did see one question says, do you give access to your testing incident form? I think Abigail might have answered that.
I put the faculty FAQ. I saw somebody was asking for that, so I posted the link to that page for the testing incident form. Let me see if I can get that up for you guys.
And if not, you can email us and we'd be happy to, share any of this information. I mean, this again, we're constantly editing stuff. Every day we're like, oh, we didn't think of that. Let's do this. And I mean, again, I think that's just us being, the creative people.
Yeah, I just put my email in the chat, so you can email me and I can share some of these documents with you.
There don't seem to be as many questions as there are as many compliments. So that is a testament. And I, along with my colleagues, can say, not only has this been wonderful and fabulous, but it's the sassiest presentation I have ever heard. And you certainly have changed my definition of sassy, because now I'll be thinking sassy. Oh, no, not stupid. No, I don't mean that. I don't mean that. So without further ado, I want to thank you so much for your contribution and doing something that seems so effortless, and yet we know at the twist of a turn that everything can be turned upside down. And so we thank you for sharing your expertise and being our role model in this, because I hope that everybody else will gain some sassiness when they start dealing with all these other issues. And I want to thank you for that. I also want to remind everyone, we'd like to thank our interpreters, and also we'd like to ask the closed captionists to join us after this. So when you log off, log right back on. And I think without further ado, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.